Great. So, welcome everyone to today's session, Risk Ready Communities Summer Preparedness. Great to have lots of you on today's call. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy today's session and find it engaging and informative. So, just a little bit of housekeeping to start off today's session with. So, I'm Alice, I'm part of the Risk Ready Communities delivery team. Also joined today by Rachel, Joe, and Laura, who also are part of the Risk Ready Communities team. They'll be in the chat today, supporting with questions and comments. So do put anything in there that you want to raise. That'd be great. As we've just mentioned, the session is being recorded and it will be hosted on the Risk Ready Communities webpage. So you've got it as a future reference. Be great to also have you introduce yourselves in the chat. If you want to just introduce yourself, say where you're coming from today, that'd be great. Just a bit of housekeeping from a sort of smooth running point of view. If you can stay on mute just during the session, it just means that there's no interference in the background. And if you can use the hand up function in Zoom, or ask any questions in the chat as we go through. We'll sort of have opportunities to contribute. There'll be sort of interactive elements. We'll be posing questions to you to reflect on, but also if you've got any specific questions, we'll make sure we've covered those as well. We're also joined today by Mark Rogers from the Met Office, so we'll be hearing from him shortly, just on sort of a wider perspective on the sort of climate and sort of current and future risks. So just introducing Risk Ready Communities for those of you who aren't familiar. It is a community resilience programme being run in partnership with the LLR Resilience Forum, being delivered by Communities Prepared and Groundwork 5 Counties. It's designed to help residents and communities across LLR to prepare for current and future risks. And that programme will be, during the programme, we'll be hosting webinars such as this, workshops and events. And we're also working directly with community groups and local councils on their community response plans. So do get in touch. We'll share further information towards the end of the session, how you can get in touch. But lots on offer. So make sure you're following along with the programme to find out more. But just focusing on today's session then, things that we'll be covering. So it is the summer preparedness session. So we'll be looking at summer related risks and hazards. And that will include hot weather and heat waves, wildfires, power outages, summer storms and flooding, droughts. And within all of that, we'll be understanding the hazards themselves, the impacts and risks that they bring. We'll be exploring who is responsible for risk management of those hazards and risks. And then we'll be exploring preparedness actions for individuals, households, and communities. So we'll just start off today with a bit of a poll. This is just to sort of get a sense of who's in the room, how we're feeling, where we're sort of currently at. So this is not about kind of right or wrong questions or answers. It's more just a bit of an icebreaker. So I will just launch that now. Hopefully you can see that now. Please let me know if you can't. So it's the first question is, what are your main concerns relating to summer hazards? So if you can choose as many as you like. So just on the sort of hazards and risks that we'll be looking at today, what is it that you're particularly concerned about? But if there is something else, do put that in the chat as well. And then question 2 is just how you currently feel in terms of your preparedness. Do you feel sort of somewhat prepared, not very prepared, somewhere in the middle? As I said, that's absolutely fine. Hopefully today's session will give you lots of insights and understanding that will make you feel a bit more prepared. Hopefully we've all had a chance to do that. I'm going to end that there, and then hopefully you'll be able to see the results. So it's great to see quite a mixed focus area. So it's great that we'll be touching on all of these hazards, sort of heat waves and hot weather, summer storms and flooding coming out as those sort of top priorities. And then in terms of sort of how we're feeling, sort of somewhat prepared, sort of somewhat unprepared and very unprepared. That's absolutely fine. As said, we're here to support. The Risk Ready Communities programme is designed to help you feel more prepared, feel more risk ready, and also support each other. So those of you who are feeling somewhat prepared, it's a great opportunity for others to hear from you, for you to sort of share your insights. So please do make sure that you're sharing experiences, suggestions in the chat as we go through, because it's a great way to connect all of you as well as you connecting with us as Risk Ready Communities. Perfect. I will hand over now to Mark, who is just going to give us a bit of an overview of sort of current climate and future climate and sort of the things that we need to be aware of before we go into today's session in more detail.
Hello everyone, my name is Mark Rogers. I'm Met Office Advisor for Civil Contingencies. So I work alongside emergency responders and some community responders in preparing for severe weather. I'm going to try and share my slides. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that. So changing weather risks. So climate change, or a changing climate, should I say, is something that's ongoing. We've seen warmer conditions. We just need to go back to last week. And when we talk about climate changes, we talk about 30-year statistics. So we group our climate statistics into 30-year periods. So what we've got here is comparison between those 1991 to 2020, and then going back to that 1961 to 1990. You see on the picture on the right, so on the left, that temperatures have risen over that period. So our mean annual temperature has changed, and for many parts of, well, whole of the UK, it has increased. But for parts of the East Midlands, East Anglia, it's gone up by over a degree. So it's much warmer than it has been in the past. It's also much wetter, as you can see on the right-hand side. So the blues are increases in precipitation through the whole year. And see the majority of those are in the blue area. So we have seen between a 5 to 10% increase in rainfall. So we are already seeing changes from what conditions used to be like. And temperature-wise, we just need to go back to summer 2022, when the temperature hit that 40 degrees. I joined the Met Office back in 1988, so a very long time ago. And if you'd said to me then that the temperature had hit 40 degrees in the UK, I probably would have laughed at you. It shouldn't be possible, but unfortunately it is. And we can see that all the higher temperatures that we've seen in the UK are all much more recent in the last sort of 20 years or so. And as you see on the graph, or the GIF on the right-hand side, 76, the temperatures are all in the red zone, which are 32 to 34, and then they've gradually gone up into the white zone, and then 2022 up into the very white, 37 up into the 39, 38, 39, 40 degrees. So our temperature is increasing across the UK. And as a fine example, I couldn't not talk about last week. So last week was very warm, temperatures over 35 degrees in a couple of places in London, beating the previous record by a couple of degrees. Spring itself for the whole of the UK was very warm. Leicestershire, Rutland were over 1.5 degrees warmer than a normal, in inverted commas, spring, the long-term average. And it was the warmest spring on record for large parts, all those dark red areas, large parts of the UK, for England, and England particularly. It was the warmest spring on record, and very dry as well, only half the amount of rainfall. So we are seeing these regular springs where we're seeing warmer, drier conditions in spring, usually following on from a warmer, wetter winter period, and then leading into a much warmer summer period. And it's these spring conditions which lead to some of those summer preparedness and summer impacts that we're going to talk about today. So we have seen extreme events. We've talked about heat waves. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. We are beginning to see impacts, more extreme impacts now. Those summer heat waves, July 2022 being a fine example. Then the heavy rainfall that we see. Most of the heavy frontal rainfall tends to come in the winter, but in the summer we are seeing more torrential downpours from those big thunderstorms, as we've seen over the last few days. Some big thunderstorms, big downpours, and they are becoming more intense as our atmosphere warms. And then again, looking back to 2022 in particular, but almost any year now, we're seeing those wildfires, and the wildfires are increasing in intensity and severity in a warming climate. So that's our current changes. That's the changes that we're already seeing. Now the future changes. So hot weather and heat waves. These are taken from the UK Climate Projections 2018, and look at how winters and summers are likely to change. We won't concentrate too much on the winters, but in the summer our temperature could increase by around 5 degrees. We've already seen around a 1 degree increase, but it could go up as much as 5 degrees. And those hot summer days could increase by almost as much as 7 degrees, depending on how much we warm the atmosphere. Probably the most stark and interesting one is on the right-hand side there, whereas on average we tend to see, or have tended to see, one hot spell every 4 years, where by 2070, and I think we're beginning to see that now, it's beginning to increase, we are likely to see 4 hot spells a year. So rather than 1 every 4 years, we could see 4 every year. And last year we saw 4 heat waves during the summer. So as I say, it's already we're heading towards that. So just to give you an idea, summer temperatures, average temperatures in Leicestershire have gone from 15.3 already up to 16.4. And then depending on how much the world warms, 2 degrees or 4 degrees, we're either going to increase by another 3 degrees or possibly 5 degrees. And that maximum temperature has already gone from 29.1 to 31.1, so already increased by 2. And that could go up by 5 to 9 degrees. So a significant increase in our summer temperatures. So those increased temperatures lead to increased risk, excess deaths. We've already seen that over the last few years, where we see excess deaths due to increased temperature, 3,000 in 2022. Transport disruption, melting runways, buckling rails, melting roads, water shortages and outages. Some parts of the UK have seen that already this year, Kent, Sussex. Water rescues, about 15 deaths due to cold water shock and cold water issues over last week. Wildfires, over 200 wildfires already in this country this year, and drought. So things we are likely to see increasing in the future. Flooding, winter rainfall is likely to increase by 35%. It's already increased a bit. And our summer rainfall is expected to decrease by as much as 47%. What we're seeing at the moment is that our springs are very much drier, very much warmer, whereas our summers, statistically, rainfall-wise, are not changing a great deal. But when we do see rainfall in the summer, it's less frequent, but we are seeing heavier downpours, could increase by as much as 25%. So I think a place where we used to get 100 millimetres, that'd be 125 millimetres, and so on. So yes, increased downpours, generally a drier summer, but wetter winters. So in Leicestershire, we've gone from 1.76 millimetres per day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but spread over the month, down a bit. But we could see big decreases leading to increase in wildfires conditions, because the ground is dry, and drought conditions in the future. Said that already. So the wildfire risk is going to increase, particularly for central and southern parts of England, due to those summer temperatures. So those changing spring and summer conditions leading to an increase in the wildfire risk, particularly during those summer months. It's a combination of high temperatures, low humidity, low rainfall, and some high winds increases that risk of wildfires. Now, wildfires are a natural occurrence. They have always happened in the history of the world, but they are increasing in frequency and severity due to a changing climate. We've seen that across the world We've seen that in the UK. So obviously impacts from wildfires, destruction of land, danger to buildings on that rural-urban interface, which is what we saw in 2022, poor air quality from all that smoke and so on, and impacts on resources, trying to put them out. So if you wanted to find out where those changes are, we're going to look at that. But first of all, hopefully you're monitoring warnings. So it enables us to be proactive to what's coming rather than being reactive to what's just arrived. So hopefully you've signed up to receive the warnings from the Met Office. So that can be via the Met Office, but probably a Gov delivery. So you can sign up for those. Met Office website, Met Office app, which I'm sure you all have on your phone, and then or TV and radio. Or there is the local authority climate service, where you can get that climate change information for what is happening to our climate and what is likely to happen to our climate going ahead. So in the local authority climate service, you can go to the Explorer and pick up the information for Leicestershire for yourself. And these give you the graphs that I've already shown. This is where I got the graphs from for this presentation. So you can get the information for yourself and you can get a whole report. So you can just click on, if we go back to the Prim, you just click on Generate Report for Leicestershire and it will give you a whole report for Leicestershire. Loads of information in there, explaining climate change, explaining and so on and so forth. But that's all I wanted to cover for now, but I'm happy to take any questions. I possibly won't be here at the end of the session, so if you've got any questions from me, then do ask them now.
Thanks so much, Mark. Any questions for Mark about anything we've touched on before we move ahead with today's session? Sounds like you're all stunned to silence, so all good. But thank you so much, Mark. That's really great to get your insights on that. So thank you. And we will have more time for questions and things. So please do put anything in the chat as we go through. Great. So just moving on to the rest of today's session. So we'll now go into the hazards we've just sort of touched on in a bit more detail, sort of understanding a bit more about them, a bit more about the impacts before we then move on to the actions that we can take to be better prepared. So just starting off with hot weather and heat waves. So we hear the word heat wave often. We've heard it sort of over the May bank holiday weekend, but it's useful just to understand what actually quantifies as a heat wave. What is the definition of a heat wave? So in the UK, it is based on a threshold, a time frame, and a location. So the official definition is a UK heat wave threshold is met when a location records a period of at least 3 consecutive days with daily maximum temperatures meeting or exceeding the heatwave temperature threshold. And as we can see in the graph and in the graphic there, the threshold does vary across the UK, as you can imagine, sort of different geographical differences in temperatures. But it's useful to understand what a heat wave is. But that's not to say that even that just because a period of hot weather may not necessarily be defined as a heat wave doesn't mean that it's not bringing with it risks and impacts as well. So a heat wave has that kind of official definition, but sort of hot weather more broadly still does need to be engaged with as a risk, even when it doesn't quite meet that definition. Mark's already done a great job at covering off that May bank holiday, so just sort of touching on that in a bit more detail, sort of localized. So we did see those record-breaking temperatures. We actually sort of saw a amber heat health alert as well, which we'll come on to in a bit more detail in a moment. And as a result of the heat, as often is the case, we then got significant storms, and we had a yellow storm warning and significant periods of sort of thunder and lightning. At one point, a home did have to be evacuated following a lightning strike. Thankfully, no one was injured. although the home was very badly damaged. But as we can sort of see from that May bank holiday weekend alone, we really sort of had a combination of hazards sort of coming together, really sort of bringing that those challenges and those risks and impacts. So, on the topic of risk management, how are heat waves and hot weather managed in the UK? So, in the UK, heat waves are jointly managed by the UK Health Security Agency, who focus on the impacts on public health, and then the Met Office, who are in charge of the weather forecasts and alert system. So, just sort of focusing on the UK HSA, the Health Security Agency, they provide the weather health alert system, which is one of the main warnings that can help us to understand the likely risk and likely impact of the heat on our health. We can see here that there are 4 different colour related levels, depending on the expected scale of impact and by who. So green, as you might imagine, has minimal impact, sort of the time for preparedness. Yellow is where the impact is likely to be focused on those who are particularly vulnerable to heat. Amber is when you're likely to see the impacts felt across the whole population by everyone, and also where we'll really sort of start to see the NHS under significant pressure and those sort of wider impacts from the heat beyond just health. And we'll come on to some of those in a moment. And then a red warning is significant risk to life. There's only ever been one red heat health alert, and since the creation of the system, and that was issued in 2022 in that record-breaking heat wave. So just to sort of look at that in a bit more detail, put it in a bit more context, as I mentioned before, there was a amber alert for the East Midlands. So that's an amber heat health alert over the May bank holiday weekend. It was actually in place for 5 days. So what that meant was that during that 5-day period, it was likely that everyone in the East Midlands would be impacted by that heat wave. There would be significant pressure on the NHS and sort of more wider reaching impacts on sort of wider infrastructure as well. You can sign up for these updates, and the links will be included in the slides, and you can sort of explore the sort of supporting resources that's also provided as part of the heat health alert system. So just coming on to risks and impacts for heat waves and hot weather. So who is at risk? Well, it's more than you might think, and ultimately it does depend on lots of different factors, whether that be health, age, location, likely exposure. So there's lots of factors to be considered, and not surprisingly, there are lots of people who are perhaps more at risk than they might not realise. So sort of significantly at risk groups, sort of people over the age of 75, people with chronic and underlying health conditions, people struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, people with mental health conditions. Sort of heat brings sort of a lots of compounding factors. People who have severe physical or learning disabilities or limited mobility really get sort of heavily impacted by the heat. Also, as well, people living or working in urban settings, sort of we really do sort of see a significant difference in sort of temperatures in sort of urban areas, sort of the heat island effect. And also those sort of economically and socially marginalised groups unable to sort of keep cool in the ways that others are able to do, because obviously there's sort of financial implications of that. People who are homeless, sort of a lot of real challenges come when with the sort of the heat. Often we sort of think about the challenges faced by the homeless in the winter, but the summer brings a lot of challenges as well. People living alone or who are socially isolated, people working outdoors. We had a very interesting discussion on those challenges in sort of the previous webinar. People living in top floor flats, which often surprises people. Sort of the heat rises in buildings, and so a top floor flat is likely to be significantly hotter than those sort of living on the lower floors. People living in care homes. They are very much designed, as are most of our buildings, to keep the heat in, to keep people warm, to keep people safe, which does bring a real challenge when it comes to staying cool in the summer months. People who are pregnant and babies and young children as well sort of really face real sort of challenges. So lots of people at risk there, lots of sort of quite compounding factors. So things to be aware of amongst yourselves personally, but also within your communities as well. And just sort of looking beyond health, sort of health is a primary serious impact, but it sort of doesn't just sort of sit there. So from a health perspective, we've sort of touched on it can lead to deaths. There are and does sort of risk of hospitalisation, dehydration, heat stroke. Also sort of the challenges faced with sort of mental health and well-being. A sort of secondary impact sort of is also kind of air quality, pollution, and also kind of high pollen, which sort of does impact a wide variety of people as well. And beyond health as well, we've got infrastructure damage during sort of heat waves and hot weather. Sort of touched on some of those already, but sort of transport delays, disruptions, damage to power lines, causing power outages, then the associated sort of comms outages, challenges around water and energy supplies. And as I just touched on, buildings are very much designed to keep the heat in. And so we are not necessarily building with sort of the future heat that we've just sort of saw at the start in mind. And so that will bring a lot of challenges currently, but also in the future. There's the heat and hot weather really does put strain on the health service, sort of increased demand for GPs, hospitals, and kind of emergency services. And we also see a significant impact on the economy, sort of low levels of productivity, and sort of despite the fact that sort of there is a real sort of people like to enjoy the British summer weather, come and enjoy that from a tourism perspective. Obviously, there is a real risk involved, particularly if temperatures are getting as high as we saw last weekend. So heat waves themselves, as we sort of saw at the start, are going to increase in frequency, severity, and duration. Despite that, they are often called the invisible risk affecting the UK. There is a real challenge with getting people to recognise the risk, which in turn limits their ability to be prepared and be resilient. I'm sure we've all heard the phrases like having a proper summer, or about time we got some good weather. But heat waves are dangerous and deadly. Sadly, nearly 3,000 people died following the record-breaking temperatures that we saw in 2022. A number that I'm sure is a lot higher than perhaps some of you were expecting. And so it sort of really does bring home those challenges. The images that we're seeing here are a sort of an indication of often how we are shown heat waves in the media. I'm sure we've all seen the sort of the crowded park, crowded beaches, people queuing for ice creams are often the sort of the pictures that we get shown when we're talking about heat waves. But that does not bring home the real challenge, the real risk, which, as we've just touched on, can be deadly. So it's really important to recognise the risk, help others in your community to recognise the risk so that we're being prepared and we're getting ready for heat waves now and in the future. Another serious risk that often comes as a sort of secondary impact, secondary hazard when it comes to heat waves and hot weather are water-related deaths. Tragically, there have now been 15 confirmed water-related deaths following the UK May bank holiday heat wave. People, especially young people and children, using the water to cool off and then not realising the dangers. This is especially critical with inland locations, sort of rivers, lakes, canals, reservoirs. The risks really do include sort of submerged hazards. People are just not aware of what's in the water, how deep it may be, sort of other related sort of hazards that may be connected to the water. Cold water shock is a real challenge, despite the fact that people are sort of thinking that they want to cool off, and it's incredibly high temperatures outside the water. The water temperature itself, especially in those inland locations, is often significantly colder, and then people jump in and then suffer cold water shock, which can very quickly lead to drowning. Um, and then other instances, sort of risks where people themselves try to rescue others, but they themselves then get into danger and then become sort of also at risk, and then need to be rescued themselves. And then also the reality of sort of many of these locations could be remote. They may be on private land. There may be limited safety features, especially if they're not sort of designed to be used by the public. So lots of risks there, lots of hazards that we need to be aware of when it comes to water dangers at any time, but especially during a period of hot weather and heat waves. So you've heard a lot from us so far, so it'd be great to open the floor now and hear from some of you. If you want to put it in the chat or come off mute, whichever you prefer. But have a bit of a think and share what actions can we take to be better prepared for hot weather and heat waves. And while you're thinking about that, we'll just go to the chat and just see if there's any other specific questions that we want to cover off.
Yeah, so Paul asked about what the government is doing to ensure that our homes are not only well insulated in winter but cooler in these hotter summers.
It's a great question, Paul. I'll be honest, I can't speak to that in any great detail, but certainly something that we need to be aware of. And there are things that you can do yourselves to sort of keep your homes sort of cooler, which we'll touch on. But I'm afraid I can't speak to kind of the wider government plans and initiatives. But it is a challenge that we're all going to face. Got a couple of hands up I can see. I'm not sure who got there first. So if I go to you, Bruce. Not sure if you're on mute, Bruce.
Yeah, there we go. So turn it off now. Yeah, so Bruce Durham from Market Harborough. On the heat side, my wife suffers from heat, so we have put in external shutters as shower curtains, which are a very cheap way of covering off the windows on the south side of the house of our bungalow, which works a treat. And put in an AC system, and as a local service to our local community, we act as a cool house during the heat waves so that elderly people who are suffering can come and cool off here.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Bruce. A great initiative, and we'll touch on cool spaces in a bit more detail. But no, that's great, and great to sort of share sort of initiatives and ideas to keep you cool that aren't too costly. So no, thank you. Who else has got? Someone else has got their hand up. Just trying to. Pete, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Oh, brilliant. My name's Pete Degnan from a YouTube channel called Foxspot. First of all, will you acknowledge that the importance of spreading a lot of this information far and wide across the county?
Absolutely. It's the Risk Ready Communities program is designed to do just that, to share this as far and wide as we can. It's for everyone living in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So we are really trying to get the message out and sort of raise awareness. So yes, very much our aim.
The second part of that question is, I attended prior to Christmas meeting where we were discussing flood risk management, and I swapped emails with a senior engineer who turned around and said that we wanted at Foxpot to be able to carry information to far and wide across the county, as you already said is important. The last conversation we got was it was just waiting to hear back from colleagues. That's the first week of January. I think that's a little bit long to wait for something that is obviously very important.
No, I can understand that, Pete. I'll be honest. As I wasn't part of that conversation, it's not something that I can comment on. But if you want to just put your name and email address in the chat, or send us a direct message on via the chat, we will endeavour to pass that on to colleagues and sort of support with that where we can. But in terms of sort of risk ready communities, we are absolutely trying to get this message out and far and wide. So yeah, please do put that those details in the chat, and we'll make sure that we try and connect you as best we can. That would be great. Paul, I can see your hand going up. Please come in.
Hi, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Great. These calls, this is the second one I've been on. It's very difficult as an individual to know what part do I play in all of being prepared for these things. And sometimes it's quite overwhelming. Bruce raised the issue earlier about the cool space. He is the cool space for his community. Is this an initiative that is going around with the LRF or with local authorities or anybody like that? Because I'd be very interested to hear about that. I live in sheltered housing here. We have a communal lounge area. We're surrounded by other bungalows and flats for the elderly as well. So I was just interested in that, whether it was just a personal initiative or whether it was a county scheme or something like that.
So it's not necessarily a county scheme. I'll touch on it in a bit more detail a bit later. But what sort of the Cool Spaces initiative is the sort of the flip side of the Warm Welcome campaign. So the Warm Welcome campaign is for those of you who aren't familiar, is designed sort of for in the winter months, giving people somewhere to go to stay warm, to be connected, but sort of recognizing when we see these future predictions on temperatures, the same will be needed during the summer months. So cool spaces are a growing need. So it is something that is sort of in the pipeline. There are different kind of things happening. It's certainly something that we'll touch on in a bit more detail. Sort of during today's session, but just to go back to your other sort of point around sort of feeling quite overwhelmed, sort of not sure where to start. It's a really valid and important reflection. So thank you so much for sharing that, Paul. It is a challenge, and so hopefully we will provide sort of different ideas and insights today. Today's sort of session is very focused on the hazards themselves. So we've kind of come at it from a heat wave and summer hazards perspective. Something that we are also within Risk Ready Communities developing is a more sort of household and individual level kind of piece of content that will come probably a bit later in the year. So watch this space, make sure you're sort of signed up to receive those updates and following us on social media. And that will really sort of hopefully start to break down some of those sort of actions that we can take as individuals. And then that will sort of in turn help to then expand into that kind of community action. So there's lots of different things, different actions that we can take. It's not that we're saying do everything now immediately. It's sort of finding ways to sort of break that down and sort of find things that are manageable. But we're always very happy to have more of a conversation with you directly, Paul. So if that's sort of something we can do, please do get in touch, and we can kind of go from there. But thank you for sharing. I think they're important reflections. So thank you.
I think, like a lot of people on this call, although we're individuals, we're members of groups and organisations. And so, for example, I recognise the warm the warm schemes over the winter period, but I hadn't considered the pool scheme, the pool space initiative in that. So I can go back to another organisation and say, hang on a minute, why don't we have pool sessions when we see that? So thank you for that. That was really, as an individual, that's a useful takeaway to then go back and improve our local community. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Paul. I think there's lots of discussion going on in the chat. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving forward. There will be other opportunities to share as we go through and ask any questions, but please do keep using the chat as a way to sort of share ideas and ask questions. But no, thank you very much, everyone. So just moving us on then to wildfires and just exploring wildfires in a bit more detail, expanding on that. So what is a wildfire? So a wildfire is an unwanted vegetation fire that happens outdoors, and in the UK they affect grassland, woodland, moorland, heathland, and even urban fringe areas. The National Fire Chiefs Council uses a number of criteria to identify what makes or quantifies a wildfire. This can include the size of the wildfire itself, the height of the flames, the amount of fire and rescue resources needed, where the fire poses a serious threat to people, property, infrastructure, or the environment. As we sort of touched on earlier, it's important to recognise that these wildfires aren't always negative. They are a part of nature, sort of part of some ecosystems depend on them. But the real challenge comes when these fires intersect with human activity, where homes, transport, links, utilities, businesses and communities are at risk. And wildfires can spread very quickly, which we'll sort of touch on in a moment. So on that sort of, so one of the key things to understand about wildfires is how quickly a small fire can grow under the right conditions. Wildfires spread faster when vegetation is dry, when the weather is hot, dry and windy, and when there are large open landscapes that allow the fire to move easily across the ground. It doesn't actually have to be sort of incredibly hot or a heat wave for there to be a wildfire. Sort of that sort of dry vegetation and sort of other challenges really kind of can escalate. And those sort of several different sort of factors that make these fires spread. The first sort of is sort of sparks and embers. So wind can carry kind of burning material a very long way at times. So, and then that sort of can land on sort of roofs, gardens, dry vegetation, and kind of means that the wildfire spreads. Radiant heat is another way where sort of even without kind of direct contact with flames, the intense heat can actually ignite other materials and damage buildings. And then, of course, direct flames coming into contact and sort of physically reaching structures and vegetation. So understanding these pathways can just help us be more mindful and sort of take practical risk reduction measures, such as sort of vegetation management, reducing kind of fuel close to buildings, and sort of being aware of risks during extreme weather conditions. But we'll touch on that a bit later as well. So in the UK, most wildfires are actually caused by human activity and usually accidentally so, rather than deliberately. So it's really important that we recognise sort of the common causes, and so then we can understand what we can do to mitigate that. So disposable barbecues are a really common cause. Campfires as well that have not been extinguished, discarded cigarettes, discarded rubbish more generally, but especially glass, which then can create ignition. The burning of sort of waste and bonfires that sort of get out of hand, especially when sort of conditions are very dry, sort of machinery creating sparks, land management fires, sort of escaping control, and sort of then deliberate fire setting, which does happen, but it does represent a significantly smaller portion of these instances. As said, natural causes are much less common, but they may be lightning strikes, which are very rare. Occasionally, fires start through sort of natural ignition through sort of decomposing vegetation as well. The positive message here is that most wildfires in the UK are preventable. So it's sort of more focused on raising awareness, that behaviour change, and sort of individual and community action that can genuinely reduce the risk. So on that, who helps manage wildfire risk? Lots of different organisations and people working together. So during an active wildfire, the lead response agency would always be the Fire and Rescue Service. They are the front line emergency response to suppress the fire. Then you've got sort of landowners, land managers who play a key role in prevention, sort of mitigation and recovery, sort of making sure that they are managing their land responsibly, maintaining fire breaks, helping restore land after the fire as well. Local authorities support with emergency planning, community protection, recovery coordination, particularly where sort of homes and infrastructure or vulnerable communities may be affected. The Environment Agency helps manage environmental impacts. And then finally, the public, everyone has a role that they can play. As we've sort of said, most wildfires are preventable. So acting responsibly, being aware, raising awareness, reporting fires early really does sort of help manage that risk. So it's ultimately a shared responsibility. Although you should never attempt to tackle a fire, it's if you see a fire, you always report it and ring 999. So risks and impacts. So a couple of examples of wildfires that have happened in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. The first one being in Warren Hills, which is the section of Charnwood Lodge. This was back in 2023. Fortunately, it was contained to a very small area, but had a huge impact on local wildlife and ecosystems. So thankfully it was contained, but as we've sort of just been touching on, were it able to spread, it could be significant. Barden Hill in Colville in 2025, so last year, the fire was significantly fanned by dry weather and low moisture levels, so it was able to spread very quickly. Multiple fire and rescue crews were deployed, and local residents were warned to keep windows and doors closed. So just a couple of more localized examples, just sort of bringing home the challenge that we've already sort of been facing within LLR. So how do wildfires affect people? So first and foremost, there is a real risk to loss of life. Sadly, wildfires can cause deaths, both from the sort of being caught in the fire itself, but also through burns and smoke inhalation and other related risks. Health impacts more broadly, so smoke and pollution in the air cause respiratory problems, burns, both sort of external, but also internal from breathing in hot fumes. And then the mental health impacts, sort of anxiety and trauma that come as a result of being impacted by a wildfire as well. Then sort of looking more broadly at our communities, so kind of the impacts, property damage, so whether that be sort of homes, buildings or other structures in our communities, disruption to services, so that might be transport closures, sort of impacts on roads, railways, sort of loss of power, communication outages, sort of damaging the overhead lines and telecom infrastructure. So lots of sort of knock-on impacts, particularly around infrastructure, which would then themselves bring their own challenges and risks. Evacuation and displacement as well. Thankfully, we didn't see evacuation in those two wildfire examples, but had they been bigger, had they been able to spread, we may well have done. But they do at times force communities to evacuate, leave their homes and belongings, which does have a significant impact. And then recreation and tourism. These wildfires cause sort of loss of green spaces, impact to ecosystems. And given the sort of link that we've saw just before to human causes, tourists that are coming into the area could actually also be creating that impact sort of unknowingly, not knowing how to use these spaces correctly, not being aware of the risks of local areas, and then impacting the local community. Wider impacts of wildfires, so also bring significant impacts, economic impacts, so loss of property, sort of damage to infrastructure, loss of revenue, sort of costs of rebuilding. We've touched a lot already on infrastructure, that sort of agricultural damage to sort of other infrastructure as well, sort of roads, railways, utilities. Those environmental impacts, sort of loss of biodiversity, soil degradation, water pollution, air pollution, lots of sort of environmental impacts which are long lasting. And then also policy and governance impacts of we see increased pressure on land management, and resource allocation also gets impacted as well. So I'll just move us on now to some other summer hazards. We focus quite a bit on hot weather, heat waves and wildfires, but as we sort of touched on earlier, lots of other hazards that we need to be aware of in summer. So despite sort of summer temperatures, summer storms and flooding stay a very real risk during the summer months. Sort of very dry conditions followed by a heavy downpour, often unexpected, can lead to summer flooding instances, especially increased surface water flooding, which is very difficult to predict. Aviva, the insurer, has actually shared that over a third of home insurance flood claims now actually occur between June and August, really bringing home the reality of those sort of summer flooding instances. Some examples, sort of recently in LLR that I'm sure we're familiar with, was sort of flash flooding incident in Leicester and Leicestershire in 2023. And although not directly linked to flooding, but sort of as a result of, or sort of as part of an incident, sort of golf ball sized hailstones from 2021, which many of you I'm sure remember. So flooding still stays a risk even during the summer months. So something to still keep in mind, be prepared for. Also sort of connected to that and sort of wider hazards, we've sort of touched on this already, sort of a lot of the impacts we've touched on around infrastructure damage can then lead to power outages and kind of the knock-on effects. So that may be kind of rise in electricity demand during a heat wave and hot weather, or kind of damage to the infrastructure itself, sort of low efficiency and other damages. Really means that sort of we're unable to stay cool, preserve or cook food. Those power outages bring kind of other challenges, communication challenges, transport disruption and economic losses as well. So again, another sort of significant risk to be aware of. The flip side as well of some of the things we've touched on are droughts. So sort of where we have significantly less rainfall, and that really does impact infrastructure, agriculture, ecosystems in many, many ways. Sort of impacts us as communities, sort of with a hosepipe ban perhaps, but is also sort of a contributing factor as well to other hazards such as wildfires for those really very dry conditions that can cause a wildfire to spread, but also surface water flooding, kind of very, very dry conditions, and then a very huge, a very heavy downpour leading to surface water flooding. So that kind of contributing factor. So we'll just sort of pause there. There's lots of things we've just been touching on, lots of different risks and impacts. So what actions can we take to be better prepared for storms, flooding, power outages and droughts during the summer? Feel free to put your hand up, put anything in the chat, and we can cover that off.
Bruce, go ahead, Bruce.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just think with all these horrible things taking place, and we don't have a lot of choice over what happens. I think the key thing is just building a large network regionally of self-help community groups. The authorities are overwhelmed, and they're not going to get the funding they actually need to be able to do what they want to do. So to fill the gap, we need to build community capacity. because we've got amazing skills in our community with all the technical and scientific and engineering expertise to help the overwhelmed risk management authorities. And because these issues are our risk, not the council's risk, it's our local knowledge, it's our local capacity that can help. And so I think building a regional network of self-help where we can share best practice from across the UK, not just what happens in Leicestershire, but let's look at what happens in Yorkshire and Cumbria and Gloucestershire and everywhere else in the UK, and use that best practice to help our communities.
Thanks so much, Bruce. That's great, and your reflections are always really welcome. So thank you. I think absolutely that connection, creating that sort of shared knowledge, and sort of recognizing the roles that we can all play in supporting ourselves and our communities is really important. So thank you so much for sharing. Paul, I can see your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Hi there. Yeah, we've had the fire service, the fire prevention officer from the local station come and talk to us here in our sheltered housing scheme about fire prevention in general, but also she covered the issue in the wider locality and the wider environment about the threat of fire and all these issues that you've raised, of course, as well. So I recommend anybody who wanted to reach out to the fire service to have somebody to come out to talk to them, that their local fire prevention officers are fantastic in this area.
Thanks so much, Paul. That's great that you've been able to connect and get that support. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing. Can't see any other hands up. So I will move us on, but please do feel free to keep sharing things in the chat as we go. So, summer preparedness actions. We've looked at all of the risks, the hazards, the impacts. Now we will turn our attention to the actions that we can take as individuals and households, but also as communities to be better prepared. So starting with sort of looking at kind of individual and household actions when it comes to sort of hot weather and heat waves. First and foremost, it's really checking the weather forecast and understanding the weather forecast. So understand, well, what those temperatures might mean and the sort of actions that we need to take. Registering for the heat health alerts that we touched on earlier. The links will all be put in the slides. So you can access that, sign up for those updates. And staying safe yourselves in the heat. Things sort of like limiting your time where possible outside, especially kind of between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., which is typically the sort of hottest parts of the day. Staying hydrated, keeping cool where possible, creating airflow in our homes. Sort of lots of different ways to do that, often sort of not too costly, but appreciate that there is often a cost associated with that, which does bring its own challenges. We touched on the risk or the significant risk of sort of water, the dangers of water during a heat wave, sort of bodies of water. So really sort of raising awareness, using the resources that are available from the Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service, many of which will be included in the resource pack. But also especially sort of talking to those in your family, talking to children, young people, but also older, so that they also understand the risks, of helping to raise awareness so that people treat sort of the water sort of correctly, act correctly, and stay safe. And then sort of checking in with others in your sort of vicinity, sort of neighbours, families, friends who might be particularly at risk during a heat wave, just sort of checking that they've got what they need and are able to cope. Then when it comes to wildfires, we sort of touched on just how much of an impact human activity has on causing wildfires. So really being aware of our own individual actions and responsibilities. So making sure that we're using barbecues and fire pits safely, correctly in designated zones. making sure that we're maintaining kind of gardens and sort of having bonfires responsibly. So removing dry leaves, dead vegetation, sort of having water to hand. And ensuring that any sort of wood, fuel, flammables are stored safely and correctly as well. And sort of thinking about when you may burn that garden waste, so not during hot, dry, or windy periods. And then thinking about having a household emergency plan, just sort of having something in place so you've thought through, well, if we were going to be impacted by a wildfire, if we were going to need to be evacuated due to a wildfire or any risk, sort of what is our household emergency plan? What do we need to do on that? And then sort of looking at power outages. So first and foremost, signing up to the Priority Services Register. For those of you who aren't familiar, that is a free UK-wide service that is provided by power, gas and water companies that provides additional support and prioritises supply during interruptions to those most in need. So that will sort of, your ability to sign up to that will depend on your age, health, medical needs, but you can join for sort of a short-term need or a long-term need. So definitely worth checking that out. Having an emergency household kit. So similar to that household plan, having a bit of a kit, having things in place, a bit of surplus food and water, having a torch, just so if there is a power cut and you are without power for a little while, you are able to cope. And then sign up to the Risk Ready Communities utilities outage session that is coming in the autumn. So make sure you're following us on social media so you can keep up to date when that date is released. Then when it comes to flooding, knowing your flood risk, so you can explore this online and remembering that the risk doesn't disappear in the summer, especially when it comes to surface water flooding, but surface water flooding is very difficult to predict. So just being aware, implementing property flood resilience. You can explore lots of different things online. Flood Mary, for example, has some brilliant resources. And you can also become a community flood warden. The county council has a flood warden scheme that you can get involved with locally. And then when it comes to droughts, taking actions where you can to conserve water where possible, following advice and guidance. And the picture here is the Severn Trent water butt scheme. I'm not 100% clear if it's still in operation, but they were providing free water butts across Leicestershire. So you just need to go online, put in your postcode and see if that's still available. They may now be rolling that out to other areas, but worth looking into. Then just more broadly, community actions that we can take. So a lot of what we've heard today, a lot of the insights and the actions, particularly from an individual and household level, we can use within the community to raise awareness, engage others on sort of actions that they can take. If you have a community response plan, integrating kind of hot weather into your plan, perhaps having kind of temperatures as trigger points, both for taking action, but also stopping action if it's no longer safe. Setting up a cool space, we touched on that a little bit earlier. So these are sort of spaces that provide respite during the heat. There should be no obligation to buy anything. So even if it's held in a business, there should never be an obligation to buy. They should be free, accessible spaces. And it is something, and I know it's been shared in the chat, which is brilliant. It's something that the Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council are currently exploring. There's sort of they had a very successful sort of trial last year, so it is something that they're exploring in more detail. So you can explore that if you are living in and around Hinckley and Bosworth. Another sort of example is sort of creating shaded spaces. So if you have a community garden, creating shade, we know that trees and canopies significantly reduce ambient and surface temperatures. So sort of having those shaded places really do benefit, but it does take a long time for you to see the benefits. So kind of planting now for the future is really important. And I know, Bruce, you've got a very large sort of tree initiative, so perhaps you can share a bit more in the chat around that. as well. And sort of also touching on the water safety, raising awareness in your community more broadly, as well as sort of individually in your sort of households, but sort of raising awareness in your community, especially if you live near a body of water of any kind. But even if you don't, just raising awareness so people are aware of that risk, and supporting those in your community who may be particularly at risk as well. And then from a wildfire perspective, again, it's about raising awareness and getting people to engage, perhaps having a litter campaign, which I think I saw come up in the chat as well, which is great. So really kind of encouraging people to recognise sort of not leaving their litter, both from a sort of a community respect point of view, but getting people to recognise that there's actually a significant risk if they do so. Be aware of your proximity to sort of rural and green spaces. Locating kind of any local hydrants, being aware of sort of parking considerations, and using what three words. So what three words is a sort of an alternative way to using postcodes, as you sort of, I'm sure, have discovered when trying to use a postcode. That's typically a very large location, whereas when you're trying to report a fire, using what three words can give you a much more localized location, which makes it much easier for the fire and rescue service to respond. But absolutely must never put yourself or others at risk. If you do see a fire, call 999 and do not attempt to put it out yourselves. Then sort of community actions when it comes to sort of power outages, raising awareness of that priority services register, incorporating power outages into your community response plan, particularly sort of thinking about if you lose communication due to a power outage and what that might do, signing up to the Risk Ready Communities utilities outage session coming in this autumn. And then from a flooding perspective, being aware of flood alerts, flood warnings, monitoring and reporting drains and water waves, even in the summer. Even if we sort of think, oh, it's fine, it's something that people think about more in the autumn, but kind of keeping that visibility in the summer is really important. And keeping your community flood wardens engaged during the summer months as well. And then drought, sort of developing rainwater collection schemes, encouraging communities to use water mindfully, and considering drought resistant landscaping, particularly if you're developing a community garden or sort of trying to generate that sort of shade from a heatwave perspective. So lots of ideas, lots of suggestions, but I think going back to your point just before, Paul, which was a really important one, so I'm really glad you raised it. There's lots that we've shared today. It's not about doing everything all at once. It's about recognizing a few initial actions that you can take to sort of start your preparedness, particularly for the summer months. Sort of focusing on the topic of today, but also more broadly. So it'd be great if you just reflect for a couple of moments, sort of absorb everything you've just heard, and then write down and share in the chat or come off mute if you'd like. Just a few actions or next steps that you might have following today's call. That can be just finding out more, making connections. This isn't about sort of doing everything all at once, as I said. It's sort of, and one of those actions can absolutely be reaching out to the Risk Ready Communities team to have a bit more of a discussion and explore how we can support you and your community in more detail. That's very much something we are doing. So please do feel free to do that, and we'll make sure email addresses and contact details go in the chat towards the end. Brilliant. Lots of things already coming through, lots of ideas around sort of planting trees, planting the right species. That's great. Sort of thinking about drought resistant planting. Lots of ideas around cool spaces, exploring that. Brilliant. Lots of sort of raising awareness, particularly around wildfires, minimizing those risks. So lots of lots of actions already coming through, so that's great. Lots of things that people can start doing, start thinking about. And yes, absolutely. And also trying to get a list of sort of active community groups, creating those connections, that best practice, more contact with others. So networking and connection, absolutely. That's great to hear. So that's something that we will sort of take back into risk ready communities. We really do want risk ready communities to be adaptable and changeable to your needs as a community. Sort of what is it that would benefit you. So that sort of come through quite strongly today. Sort of how can we facilitate those connections? It's not a guarantee of something that we'll be able to do, but it's definitely something that we can explore and see what already exists as well. So if there's any questions or reflections or points we just want to go back to, or anything that's come through in the chat that we just want to expand on, then please do let us know, either in the chat or feel free to put your hand up before we draw today's session to a close. And hopefully, if they haven't already done so, I can't see it in the chat, but if we'll put in our email addresses, so you've got myself and Rachel, so you can get in touch with us directly. But we'll also put in the Risk Ready Communities webpage, which has a contact form as well, which means you can get in touch. And as I said, we'll be doing lots more of these webinars, sort of different topics we've touched on tonight. We do have a community response plan session coming up in early July, but we are also working directly with local councils and community groups. So if that's of interest, please do get in touch. Bruce, I can see your hand up. Please do come in.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. The community prepared national training sessions have been brilliant, and you've obviously continued that level of quality of work here. So thank you very much indeed. It's really useful.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Very kind words. Great that you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing all of you, hopefully on future sessions. As said, please do make sure you're following Risk Ready Communities. Also, if you're interested in featuring Risk Ready Communities in any of your upcoming newsletters, please do let us know. We're very keen to get the message as far and wide as possible. Brilliant. Well, thank you all. I'll bring today's session to a close. Thank you all very much for your time. There'll be all of these resources, part of the slides as well. But appreciate you spending your Thursday afternoon with us, and we look forward to seeing you on future sessions.